At around 10:45 p.m. on September 1st, 1993, Bill Simpson was shot dead in South Beaumont, Texas. He had gone for a walk with his friend Lydia Faye Washington and her daughter Ada Marie. A car pulled up alongside them at the corner of Victoria and Royal, and two African-American gunmen with their t-shirts pulled over their faces pulled out a Tech-9 machine pistol and demanded money. When Simpson refused, the robber opened fire. Washington's leg was blown off, and Simpson later died from severe bleeding. The Beaumont police declared it to be a random street crime. Senseless violence was not uncommon in that neighborhood, and this sad event might be easily dismissed as just another depressing example of urban decay, were it not for the fact that Bill Simpson was no ordinary crime victim. Less than 11 hours earlier, Simpson had moved from the housing complex in the nearby all-white town of Wyder, Texas, where he was a participant in a failed experiment in forced integration. Simpson had achieved a small measure of national fame as the last remaining black resident in a town with a notorious reputation that was turned into a media circus as the world watched what would happen when blacks moved into what was once known as the Ku Klux Klan capital of the South. The irony that Simpson was killed right after leaving a place where he felt threatened and moving into an area where he felt he would be safer was too much for many people. Stories persist in the area that the shooter knew his victim and that Simpson's death was surely tied to a larger conspiracy. We may never know the full details of what really led to the events of September 1st, 1993, but we are going to attempt to find out as best we can what really happened. Like any story, this tale has heroes, villains, and innocent bystanders. However, unlike most tales, the heroes may be the villains may be the innocent bystanders, and the bystanders may be the heroes. The town of Vidor, Texas was a town with an image problem, to say the least. A small family-oriented country town of about 11,000, Wyder lies just outside the oil town of Beaumont, Texas, on the border between rural Orange County and the more urbanized Jefferson County. Wyder was not founded by the classic film director King Vidor, as some locals would have you believe. But it did grow out of a workers' camp owned by his father C.S. Wyder, a turn-of-the-century Texas lumber baron. This camp actually had black workers in segregated quarters, but eventually the area became all white by default. Most people didn't move to Wyder for what it had, but for what it didn't have. Most Wydorians seemed to crave the isolation and quiet the town offered. By the middle of the last century, Wyder was known as a white haven, and was regional capital to no less than 3 Ku Klux Klan factions.
The Klan was very strong here at one time. This was considered a headquarters town for the Klan. And we had in excess of 600-700 people from this little town that used to belong to the Klan.
Urban legends abound, some fictional and some based in fact, of blacks traveling through the area and being violently harassed.
You mention about it to a black, they ain't going. You used to have a sign on the side of the road over there on 105.
And right before you got into Vidor, there was a big billboard sign, "Niggers don't let the sun set down on you."
Local history has it that a billboard warning blacks to stay out of Wyder stood somewhere on the edge of town. Although it hasn't been around since at least the 1970s, many travelers on I-10 see these billboards criticizing Wyder's alleged mishandling of a domestic homicide investigation and think they've seen the notorious anti-black signs. By the late 1980s, there had been no significant Klan or racist activity in the area. Wyder was segregated by tradition, not regulation. Supposedly, families of different races had quietly moved in and out of the area with no major incidents, until the well-publicized desegregation of the public housing complex.
My name is Bill. I come from Beaumont, Texas. I'm on my way to Wyder, Texas. I've been out here approximately 25 years, and I've seen lots of changes in this area. Changed that Beaumont's grown quite a bit, and it's shrunk, and now it's in the kind of middle of a recession. But the town of Wyder has more or less stayed the same, except for maybe a little racial integration. They've moved some blacks out to this area. I believe it's mainly financial. The public housing couldn't get their money from the government without having equality, so they moved some blacks out, much to the protest of the people from Wyder. They didn't particularly care for it, but they had no choice.
In the late 1970s, Lucille Young was illegally refused admission into the Clarksville, Texas public housing program based on her race. With the aid of East Texas Legal Services, she started a class action lawsuit against the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. In 1981, Judge William Wayne Justice ordered that all federal housing complexes in East Texas had to be racially desegregated. For over a decade, nothing happened.
I like to refer to it as passive resistance. The housing authorities that controlled those public housing projects in those 12 cities did not, in fact, want to comply with the order. They made some efforts, but not in any significantly aggressive fashion. And the cities simply used passive resistance. They made some effort to try to locate blacks to move into the projects, but not very diligently, and would always come up with the excuse that, well, we've contacted blacks who need to be, that are desirous to be in public housing, but they really don't want to move into our all-white projects, in our all-white cities.
The effort to move blacks into Vidor began well into the Young v. Cisneros litigation. It was a very difficult situation to deal with. There are about a half dozen communities, cities, within the East Texas area in which blacks historically have known they're not welcomed. And Wyder is the most well-known example of those communities. So after the easy problems in desegregating public housing in East Texas were dealt with, the waiting list situation, the difference in the amenities between the complexes were dealt with, Judge Justice and the attorneys handling the Young v. Cisneros litigation and HUD decided to tackle the more difficult problem of the communities where blacks were afraid to move into. And the one that was chosen was the obvious target, the one that everybody knew about, Wyder.
I think the whole idea was that if Wyder, once Wyder was desegregated, the others would be easy.
Lurid tales of midnight cross burnings and lynchings were more than enough to keep Wyder all white for over 70 years. In 1992, when the town of Wyder agreed to cooperate with a court-ordered desegregation of federally funded housing, it touched off a national media frenzy. Regional Klansmen were appalled that the government was desegregating one of the last all-white towns in America, and the rest of America, and eventually the world, became fascinated by a town that had apparently stayed hidden from the desegregation wave of the last 3 decades. The cameras of the world watched as 2 black families fled in terror and gasped in horror when the last black man in the complex was gunned down in the streets of Beaumont. The world's media speculated, postured, and amplified what went on in Wyder, but soon moved on to newer stories and forgot to ask one simple question: what really happened?
Now, with respect to Wyder, the important difference between Wyder, the desegregation of the Wyder project, and the other 11 all-white cities was that the leadership, political and social and religious leadership in Wyder, decided to comply with the court order aggressively.
Because there were no blacks living anywhere in Wyder, to have blacks move into the housing complex, they had to get blacks from places like Beaumont, Port Arthur, or Orange.
Albert Harrison was a Beaumont resident who began studying law in prison to help get himself out. Once free, he began studying fair housing law to help deal with his own personal landlord hassles. His accumulated knowledge was often called upon by the Beaumont chapter of East Texas Legal Services.
They began to come to me because I mostly had the answers in my head and they didn't have to do the research or go through the books on it.
Harrison seemed a perfect choice for the desegregation coordinator to comply with Judge Justice's order.
Mr. Harrison had a lot of difficulty finding black families who were willing to move there because of the reputation of the town. And when he did have some success, and I believe he told his bosses, which were the executive directors of those 4 housing authorities, who the families were, that at least one of the families subsequently received threatening phone calls and were told, don't move to Wyder. I don't think it was as pleasantly put as that. And so Mr. Harrison had decided that the thing to do was to keep any families that he had recruited secret from, among other people, his bosses, since one of his bosses was the executive director of the housing authority that included Vidor, and a man who seemed to support the continued exclusion of African Americans from his housing authority.
Harrison and his supporters contend that it soon became apparent that his job wasn't really to find blacks to move into the complex, but to spin his wheels indefinitely and just make it look like he was trying to find blacks willing to move into Vidor. Without pre-alerting his superiors, Harrison publicly announced he finally found 4 black families willing to move into the Vidor complex. The story made local headlines, but really exploded when Harrison appeared on the Phil Donahue Show, arguing his position against KKK leader Michael Lowe in front of the entire nation.
The announcement that he actually had families shocked everybody. They were counting on the reputation of Vidor to keep any black families from saying that they were willing to move there, which would have allowed HUD and the housing authorities to just sort of throw their hands up and say, well, we tried to get families, nobody will go. It's not because we didn't try. And so it's going to clearly force the issue. As a result of the controversy about it, Mr. Harrison was fired. But that still left HUD with the problem what to do about the all-white public housing in Vidor and the all-white nature of the town and the reputation.
To the white people, this is our land, our country, and we are claiming it back in the Golden Triangle for white America.
3 weeks after Harrison's announcement, but before the first blacks' arrival in Vidor, Ku Klux Klansmen and other white supremacists from all over Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas descended upon Orange County to protest the desegregation of Vidor. The largest and most memorable rally wasn't held in Vidor at all, but at the county courthouse in Orange City. The national media was there to record the enormous crowds and occasional emotional outbursts and conflicts of the blacks and whites in attendance.
Now, you ain't moving! Black person want to move in Vidor right now today. Them Klan people should not have a damn thing to say about it.
Although this event didn't happen in Vidor, footage from this event was repeatedly broadcast by the networks as examples of the racial conflicts in Vidor. Several smaller rallies were held in Vidor, mostly attended by Klansmen from outside of Vidor, giving rise to numerous complaints from city leaders that their town's reputation was being hijacked by outsiders. In a town of this size, there's no way of knowing what was going on in the hearts and minds of everyone who lived there. And of course, since the Klan is a secret organization, there's no way of knowing for sure how many active Klansmen live there. But all available evidence shows that the Klan in Vidor were most likely a very small but very vocal minority who called in outside reinforcements.
What happened afterwards with respect to the Klan coming down and marching, the nationalist movement trying to get in there and do their little thing, that had to do with the media coverage because they saw a chance to get on television. The initial harassment was local, homegrown harassment that had to do with the fact that some blacks had had the audacity to move into Vidor.
It's worth noting that almost every Klansman seen in this documentary was from somewhere outside of Vidor.
Local Klan members and sympathizers within Vidor and within the Vidor area were adamantly opposed to this desegregation effort and contacted the leadership of 2 Klan organizations operating within the state of Texas.
The 2 main Klansmen who came to Vidor were Michael Lowe from Waco, Texas, who represented the National Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, and Charles Lee from nearby Cleveland, Texas, who was the Grand Dragon of the smaller but more militant White Chameleon Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
Well, when we heard that the federal government was going to proceed with their plan to try to force the integration in Vidor area, we were contacted by people we know from Vidor. And the main complaint was that there were white people on the list waiting to get into this complex that needed housing. And these white people were told, because you're white, you're going to have to wait. In other words, they were discriminating against these people simply because of the color of their skin. So that's why we got involved. And also because we knew that this was to promote pushing together the races, which starts race mixing process, which is a violation of Yahweh's laws and destruction of the white race.
The issue of desegregating Wyder may have returned to the back burner had not the Orange County housing officials themselves come up with a solution that seemed to be the best of both worlds. The Wyder complex would be desegregated by an ailing elderly black man from Beaumont, who would technically take up residence in Wyder but almost never actually be there.
The first time I heard about it, there were two officers of the resident council and myself visited Dick Stanfield, the executive director of Orange County Public Housing. He announced to us that, to quote him, "We're going to move niggers into Wyder." He said, "I'm going to slide a couple of families in at night and show HUD we're in compliance, and then I'll slide them back out again. You guys will wake up one morning, you'll have nigger neighbors, and I don't want you to tell anyone, especially the media, anything about this."
I need somewhere peaceful, quiet, just need somewhere to stay or something.
He was a longtime resident of the Beaumont area, so he knew of Wyder's reputation. But he said that he thought things had changed and that he wasn't really worried about it.
John told me he had heard about Wyder for years, but that he thought the Klan was something from way back in the past, that they were no longer active or even around anymore.
Mr. Queir was an elderly man, and he was very sick. He had a lot of things wrong with him. I understood that he needed somebody to be around him most of the time. When Mr. Queir first moved into the Wyder projects, it is correct, as everybody say, he did bring his belongings here and then left, and nobody seen him for a couple of weeks.
I had the slightest idea this was all was going to go on. No, I just signed the sheet, put him to a place to stay. And I didn't know too much about Wyder. I worked with a few people, but I didn't even know they had a housing project.
In the beginning, he did not spend a lot of time in Wyder.
And he had got down sick, and his sister was taking care of him. When Mr. Queir was able enough to come back home to the Wyder projects, he did. He stayed here for several weeks in his apartment. Then I believe he got to feeling pretty bad again, and he moved back to Beaumont with his sister.
The next black person to move into the Wyder housing complex would wind up being its most famous. Bill Simpson was a 36-year-old black man rescued from a Beaumont crack house by a street ministry from Wyder. Simpson was living with the families of this church before he was accepted into the federal housing program, so technically it was he and not John Queir who was the first black person living in Wyder. Friends recall Bill Simpson as being a man of enormous size and charm. They also recall him as often being used for one reason or another. They say Orange County Housing Authority was also just using Bill Simpson. They needed blacks to satisfy a lawsuit and cared little for the gentle giant in their midst.
Bill Simpson moved in after John in March of '93.
Bill Simpson was a street person, a homeless person in Beaumont, Texas. He had a drinking problem.
He said that, that he had gotten into trouble with drugs. That's what led him on sort of a wandering lifestyle, that he had ended up on the streets in Beaumont. He was living in abandoned buildings.
He was found by a rather fundamentalist church in Vidor, Texas, that serviced the homeless in Beaumont.
Well, I met Bill Simpson on the street ministry. The church here from Wyder went out to street ministry to the homeless in Wyder, in Beaumont. And I met Bill the first night I was out. And he was living in an old high-rise building. It's been torn down since then. And so I just got talking to him, and me and him just hit it off. And so James, one of the street ministry guys, and a couple of us got to talking, and James said, well, he thought he'd take him home that night.
They brought Bill Simpson into the congregation, and he became reborn Christian.
He had grown up in a church-going home, a close home, with good parents. And when the people from this ministry found him, it touched something inside of him. James took him over to him and Cindy's house. And then he couldn't stay over there a couple of days. And so we went over, me and my wife went over and picked him up, brought him over here.
So my husband and I talked about it. He had an air cast on his leg. We knew where he lived. And we could not bring ourselves to take that man back to Beaumont and put him back on the street. So we had the 3-bedroom house. We invited him to come stay with us.
Oh, he stayed here 2 or 3 weeks, probably closer to 3, I guess. And while he was here, he said he was going to look into the project.
These events happened about the time they were trying to desegregate the Wyder project. In fact, it happened along about March of 1993.
And when they found out about this desegregation program, he volunteered for it because it was the quickest way for him to get a place in public housing. Otherwise, you had a long waiting list.
The church went to the housing authority and got them to move Bill Simpson into one of the units in the Wyder Public Housing Authority, or the Wyder project.
And I think the day he got in over the project, the police picked him up.
Now, the day he was moved into the project, he was arrested by the Beaumont police because of an active warrant out for his arrest. Some year or 2 years before, he had been driving down the streets of Beaumont, stopped by a police officer, the car was searched, and they found a club underneath the front seat, and he was arrested.
Yeah, he had bought an old car. And the man, he didn't know a baseball bat was in the car.
And there was a trial, he got out, there was a warrant issued for his arrest, and that warrant just simply, nothing happened. Was never exercised, nothing was done until the day he moved into the Wyder Public Housing Project.
You know, they locked him up in Beaumont, and we called around the bail bond and everything.
He was subsequently released within about 24 hours at as a result of the efforts of the minister of the church that had been taking care of Bill. And there was never anything else done with respect to that warrant.
Bill Simpson, was just down and out, you know, on his luck. He'd been homeless, you know, due to drinking and you know, doing drugs, just living on the streets. I don't know, I just felt sorry for him and felt like he needed a better life. See, the street ministers, we went out and we would preach to these men too. You know, and tell them, you know, that God loved them and, you know, they need to, you know, straighten up. I just thought I could turn him around, in other words.
You could tell he had respect. He was very, you know, respected people. And I'd come in and if I wanted something started for supper, Bill would start it before I got home, and he was a good person.
Bill made a lot of friends in Wyder and in the housing complex.
Well, Bill was very tall, 7'2", and gentle as a lamb. He was a very kind person and a very religious person.
I remember very well one afternoon that I was sitting and talking with him and some other people, and this little blonde girl, 5 or 6, came and crawled up into his big lap and grabbed a hold of him and gave him a big hug and a kiss and said, "Hello, Mr. Bill." And then her little sister came up and crawled in his lap, gave him a hug and said, "Hi, Mr. Bill." And they just sat there and he talked to him a little bit and talked to the girl's mother and whatever.
The children loved him dearly. He would, if Bill sat down in a lawn chair outside, the little children would come pile up in his lap because he would tell them stories. Bill was very, very big and very rough looking. He was very ferocious looking. He had an unkempt beard and his hair was much the same, and he could make an expression that would actually scare most people. But underneath that, Bill was a very private, very intelligent, very quiet, soft-spoken man. Bill felt that he was put in Wyder for a reason, referring strictly to his religious experiences, that God had placed him in Wyder for a reason, and as he told me, quote, "I was not put here to die."
Okay, there's 2 basic differences between John DeQueir and Bill Simpson. DeQueir had a vehicle, he had a pickup truck, and he had family in Beaumont. So he left sometimes for days. Bill Simpson didn't have a car. He didn't know a lot of people in the community. And while he felt relatively safe inside the complex, after all they had guards, big fence, he did not feel safe outside of it. And he complained that when he walked to a store, he would often get racial taunts. He was also, what, 36, 37, 38 years old. You know, he couldn't date any of the women in the housing complex because he feared that that would really get him into trouble. He felt somewhat like a prisoner.
It's not safe out here for anyone.
He was just the kind of guy that everybody loved.
Well, not exactly everybody.
You know, the blacks have the NACP to stand up for them, and we have the Klan to stand up for us.
There was this one lady who showed around a little baseball bat that she threatened to use on people. She said that she would use it on any niggers or nigger lovers that came to her door or into her yard.
John Queir, Bill Simpson, my wife Joyce, a couple of other white residents, myself, were sitting in our front yard talking. Edith Marie Johnson looked across the street and said, "Just look at those niggers." I could just puke. I looked around to see who she was referring to, and she made a comment, said, "If that goddamn mother comes in my yard, I'll kill him with my baseball bat," and that goes for those goddamn mother lovers as well.
I would not take this white one here and put her in the Magnolia Gardens because the blacks would pick on her, just like they're going to pick on the blacks out here.
I was frightened. I didn't know what we'd be living today, tomorrow. I just wanted to get my kids out of this.
And was part of that fear generated because of the activities of the Ku Klux Klan?
Yes, sir.
HUD, in its ambitious effort to recruit blacks to move into the Vidor Project, located 2 females, black females with children in Louisiana.
Oh, that was a joke. When Brenda and Alexis, the 2 black ladies, moved in, they moved from Louisiana and stopped to ask directions to public housing. They were told, "Why do you want to go there? This is Vidor." And they said, "We know this is Vidor. Where is it?" And they got directions to public housing. They moved into 2 separate apartments and immediately went into the city of Wyder looking for work. They wanted some kind of work, and no one would give them applications for employment. They were cursed.
And what they was calling us niggers, they call us a bitch.
She asked me, "What's wrong with this place?" I said, "Brenda, this is Vidor." She said, "That's the second time I've heard that today." "What do you mean this is Vidor?"
The ladies were duped into moving into the complex. They had no idea what they were coming into. They were single ladies with little, if any, support locally.
The lady across the street said, if she see a black child in her yard, that she was going to hit him with a bat.
You need to move a large group of people in, not just a couple of families here and there, so that it wouldn't be a particular target.
Just at the same time that they moved in, the grant that was paying for this extra security gave out. And they weren't here very long before there was an article in the local paper about how there were 2 black women and their kids living here, but there wasn't any security. And they saw that as an invitation to come in and get them, and they were very frightened.
She threatened the black kids. She never struck the black kids.
I've never threatened a child with a baseball bat. I would never threaten a child with nothing. The grown-ups I would, the children no.
We immediately filed a motion with Judge Justice for a temporary injunction ordering HUD to move these ladies out of the complex. That was granted within 3 or 4 days of the ladies moving into the complex.
What do you know about the black people in Vidor, about their telephones being bugged, tapped, welled, whatever it is?
I don't know about the tapping of the telephone.
Well, I believe a lot of the stories that came out of Vidor at that time were basically created. I think that the federal government had moved a lot of snitches into the area, a lot of informants.
A man claiming to be an undercover plant at the Vidor Public Housing Project says he's afraid for his life tonight. Law officers stopped, took 2 pistols from him a couple of months ago. That was the end of his so-called undercover work. But Orange County Housing Authority Executive Director Dick Stanfield confirms that may indeed have been an undercover agent for a local law enforcement agency.
And I don't believe that they could find any illegal activity, and I believe if any illegal activity took place, it was probably by some of these paid informants.
Okay, the White Community Klan, Charles Lee's group, would drive through in a vehicle, dressed in battle fatigues, camouflage fatigues, handing out flyers announcing rallies that were coming up and expressing their views on blacks and telling us what they were going to do when blacks eventually moved in.
And there was a member standing at the open door of the bus with an automatic weapon.
We didn't have guns.
Well, let me first say it, I'm not going to answer any questions about the bus.
Any at all?
You know.
People who identified themselves as white chameleon knights of the Ku Klux Klan driving into the project and telling at least one resident that they were going to blow it up. Members of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan telling residents of the Wyder project at a public rally that they were going to burn it down. And even if it killed white folk, that was okay if niggers moved in. We had evidence that a member of Charles Lee's White Chameleon Knights of the Ku Klux Klan was offering young teenagers money to beat up black kids if they moved into the project. A member of originally a member of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan who subsequently joined the White Chameleon Knights of the Ku Klux Klan threatening to kill Mayor Woods.
We believe in positive violence. Well, positive violence is the same kind of violence you saw during the birth of Texas. You know, there was a lot of violence involved there. There was a lot of violence involved in the American Revolution. It was all for a positive reason, yet it was violent. Those people that say that, you know, violence for any reason is wrong is nonsense. I don't believe in violence for negative reasons. Let's say you take one of these Hollywood movies about the Klan where it shows Klansmen going out and shooting blacks or running blacks down simply for the fun of doing it. To me, that's negative violence. But violence for a positive reason, we're in favor of it.
Michael, I would like very much for you to leave.
One day, Simpson responded to a knock at his door and met KKK Grand Dragon Michael Lowe and a camera crew from the Australian version of A Current Affair. This much and only this much is known for certain.
I'm going to air my view and it'll be finished, but apparently Bill has some other thoughts to this, and he has asked me to leave his home.
Whether or not Simpson knew of Lowe's visit ahead of time is a secret he took to his grave. What is known is that this was the last straw for Simpson staying in Wyder.
Sitting right here at the curb was Dick Stanfield, the executive director of Orange County Public Housing. Bill and I immediately walked over and complained to him that Michael Lowe had been here trying to have a confrontation.
Anybody come visit, and but if they don't want to visit with them, all they have to do is say no.
And they had a Vidor Police Department car sitting right over here at the corner of the stop sign. I walked across the street and asked the officer what he was going to do, and he stated nothing.
Right over here across the street, there was a Wyder police officer sit there laughing about it. He didn't do anything to try to stop the confrontation, nor did anyone else.
I'm very upset. I was angry a while before. I'm trying to calm down.
Eventually, the Klan was banned from going near the complex, prompting Michael Lowe to launch an unsuccessful attempt to adopt the highway that runs in front of the buildings. Charles Lee and Michael Lowe were charged with violating the Texas Fair Housing Act, and they were both sentenced to short jail terms for refusing to surrender their membership lists.
What they basically want me to do is turn in evidence against myself and other members so they can sit back and determine whether to file criminal charges, which is a violation of our constitutional rights.
Michael Lowe secured the services of a black lawyer, a prominent NAACP activist, to defend him.
Okay. Just because someone uses a reference, I don't like niggas, as an example, doesn't mean that they're a member of the Klan.
That's correct.
And just because a person is a member of the Klan does not mean that they violated the fair housing laws of this state.
That's correct again.
Now, there's nothing illegal about being a member of the Ku Klux Klan. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct.
The ATF raided a Wyder Klansman's home and found a cache of weapons and a Ku Klux Klan membership list.
When we got involved in moving the two ladies out, Bill came to me and said that he would like to move as well, that he had just really gotten beaten down and this was just more than he could really handle.
I've had a couple gentlemen outside the fence driving by and saying they're going to go home and bring back a rope, derogatory names, derogatory gestures.
These things started building, one on top of the other. He started getting more and more worried about things. It started to seem more and more hopeless. It started, I think, to him seeming like he was going to be kept there almost like a prisoner. When John Queir moved out, he was it. And it was like he was the token black person to prove that this had been desegregated, but his life would be worthless.
He feared for his life when he lived here in Vidor. The man was afraid to walk the streets, you know, where he'd come up to him, you know, hey, nigga, what you doing in Vidor, you know.
To quote him, "I'm not afraid to die. They can take this body, but they can't hurt my soul. It belongs to Jesus." Bill had a feeling that he was going to die.
This business of, I see nothing here for me but death.
You leaving? And I questioned him. Are you leaving because you're scared somebody's going to hurt you or do something to you? And he explained to me, he said he was just tired of the media just constantly at his door, that he would walk outside. There's been times me and him walked outside and they would run out there and they start asking questions. We'll have to tell them, leave us alone.
When he announced that he was moving out, the reporters really besieged him because everybody wanted that picture of him leaving. Bill told me that there were several places that he was considering, and sort of at the last minute, this one place came available. Lynne Garcia, his landlady, told me that she saw him on television, knew about his situation, that she had a little house available that she thought would be a good place for him to live. She had never rented through HUD before, so she called HUD and arranged to have it made available for Bill. Bill saw it and he loved the place, so he moved in. My wife and I were both concerned about him being here because it is a pretty bad neighborhood. Now, he felt like he was at home because he was a block away from the Salvation Army, the SAL, he called it, and he had spent a lot of time over there. And that last time I was over there, he talked about how he had gone by there and visited some of his old friends at the SAL. He was concerned the last time I was there because he had a notice that he was supposed to show up at court a day or two later for something that he thought a very minor charge that he thought had been taken care of a couple of years before that. Carried, I was in this very truck and I usually have some change on the dashboard here. He said that he wanted to buy some stamps to write to his family to tell them where he was. So I just gathered up a big handful of it and gave it to him. I think the police said he had something like $2.28 on it when he died. And I always wondered how much of that was a change from that dashboard. I wish I'd had a lot more to give him.
It wasn't no more than maybe an hour after I found out about the landlord already renting it out that Ms. Garcia called Beaumont Housing Authority and told them that she was willing to rent a house to either myself or Mr. Queir or both. But when I heard the area, I already knew about it. I knew what it was like when I was here, and it was a rough little area around here. And when I got on the phone and talked to Ms. Garcia about it, she told me exactly what was going on, that the area itself had been cleaned up, the neighborhood. You know, it's not like that anymore. She came out to Wyder, picked me up and brought me out here, showed me the place, and we walked around a little bit, and I was amazed at the transformation, and I fell in love with it.
So he took a walk that night. I think it was about 10:45, September 1st, 1993. And it was at the corner of Victoria and Royal in Beaumont. He was with a woman named Lydia Faye Washington, 40 years old. At the time, Simpson was 37. I think he'd had a couple of beers. The autopsy report said his blood alcohol level was 0.11, which is just a little bit above legal intoxication. But you understand, Simpson was more than 7 feet tall, 300 pounds. So he's walking down the street, and then a car pulls up with 4 guys inside, and 2 masked gunmen get out.
We went to the store, and we went and got us a 4 ounce. And he said, well, come on, sister, we're going to get us a bill, 4 ounce. And I told him I was going to walk me and my daughter. We were going back home. And we stood on the corner. And the boys just kept riding and riding and riding.
A car had passed by and they had yelled out something, and then the next car had passed by about 5 or 10 minutes later. Another car had came up and 2 boys had got out the car. He came over there where we was and he said, all right, let's lay it down. And nobody moved. I told my mom, I say, Mom, just do what they say do, just because I thought they just, you know, they're to rob us or something.
According to initial police statements, 2 African Americans with their faces covered got out of the car.
Like this here, with their face all covered up, but like,
you can see their eyes.
You could see their eyes, but you couldn't see their, you know, their mouth and nose. They asked Bill Simpson, give me your money, and we ain't had no money. He said, I ain't got no kind of money. He said, I ain't got but $2.15, and they still didn't even put it out. And they shot him instantly.
One grabbed for Miss Washington's purse and then shot her in the leg or knee 3 or 4 times. The man then shot Simpson in the legs, hips, and torsos. I think the autopsy report ended up that he'd been shot 5 times. He was shot with a semi-automatic pistol. Later it was found out that it was a 9mm, I think it was a Tech 9. I think Bill Simpson tried to run from the scene, and he was shot while he ran.
Bill Simpson turned and began to move as rapidly as possible away from the shooter. He had a game leg, was disabled in one leg, and he wasn't moving all that fast. And the shooter shot him. He fell on the ground. The shooter went over to Bill Simpson. Bill wasn't moving, bleeding profusely, and turned and started to walk away. He turned and noticed that Bill was still moving, came back, shot him again. Never searched him. Turned and walked away.
He died at Baptist Hospital here in Beaumont at 11:40 p.m., about an hour after the incident.
Even though I know God has been there with me, He also knows that I've taken enough. There were many nights I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, then lay there wide awake. It's hard when you don't know if anything's going to come about, and if it is, when it's going to come, who's going to be involved in it, how they're going to do it, whether they're going to come by and shoot your house or wait for you to be outside your house. It could have happened inside the projects. It could have happened outside. Thank God it never did happen.
Do you have peace of mind now?
Our load has been lifted off my shoulders. Yes, I have more peace than I felt out there. And that's because, well, this is home.
When I first heard that Bill Simpson had been shot, I figured that the federal government would probably blame it on the white chameleon.
After Simpson died, and after the investigation started to form up, all hell broke loose. You had a guy who'd been a national media figure because he had, in essence, in a lot of people's mind, gone up against the Klan and gone up against a racist city. He had been driven out because of threats of violence, and he's dead in a violent manner.
One confidential informant told me that there was a meeting of Klan leaders, he was present, where they voted to assassinate Bill Simpson.
We got a few that told us things, and mainly they just heard the gunshots. But we heard slightly different stories, or sometimes drastically different stories from each and every one. There was one lady down here, about half a block down here, who said that she saw a car screech up in front of their house right after they heard the gunfire, and saw a couple of guys with their T-shirts pulled over their heads, over their faces, jump into the car. And when they took the T-shirts down, she said that she thought that they were white.
No, I don't believe that it was a random killing on Bill.
His death was murder by the Klan. Simple as that. And I'll always state that.
An unusual thing had happened that night. Earlier, there was a robbery nearby of a restaurant employee, a 21-year-old man named Clarence Basha. Basha had been shot also, and the gunman had stolen some stereo equipment from his car, shot him twice in the leg with a .45 caliber handgun at about 9 p.m., about an hour and 45 minutes before the Simpson shooting. Basha recovered. He wasn't seriously injured. About 10:30 the next morning, 12 hours after Simpson had been shot, police arrested a suspect in the Basha robbery. There were some automatic assumptions by various people in the community that, well, you know, you had this other robbery nearby. Simpson was just a victim of the same robber.
But there's no evidence that I'm in receipt of, or the Beaumont police is in receipt of at this time, that in any way connects Mr. Simpson's murder with his stay in Wyder and his departing Wyder.
The NAACP got involved in the Bill Simpson murder investigation. They actually dispatched a couple of private investigators down here. They were talking to people, and Gary Bledsoe, who was then president of the Texas NAACP, says that he has admissible and credible evidence to show Simpson's death was not a random shooting in a robbery attempt by street gang members in Beaumont.
This is information that indicates, again, that this was possibly a non-random crime. It's evidence that indicates it's not absolute proof even of that.
Bledsoe, in his 3-page memorandum, wanted to do 3 basic things. He wanted to show that the black male arrested in the Basha shooting was not Bill Simpson's killer. He wanted to show that this was probably not a random robbery. And through information and statements provided by Bill Simpson before he died and others, show that there was a possibility that other matters were involved. I suspect what Mr. Bledsoe meant by that was some kind of racial matter or some kind of drug concerns at the complex.
I had heard 6 weeks before that KKK had a hit on his life. A neighbor that was friends with a Klan member. She told me that this woman from the projects, who was a Klan member, if he didn't quit talking to the TV, he wouldn't live. They were going to get him. There was a hit on his life.
When I talked to Bill on the telephone, he said that he had finally had damning evidence against Orange County. I asked him to send me copies of all the evidence he had. He promised he would, but I never received it, and that's the last time I talked to Bill. The circumstances leading up to Bill's moving from Wyder are really very suspicious. If I had known Bill was going to move to Beaumont, I would have advised against it. He was safe in Wyder because as long as he was there, he was in the spotlight. It's awfully strange that Bill qualified for a Section 8 program without an income, which is against HUD regulations. He was moved into a house that was owned by a woman that did not participate in the Section 8 program. And all of this happened so quickly, Bill's attorney, Tom Oxford, went to Bill's house to retrieve some of his papers, and everything was gone.
And that's one of the mysteries of the whole thing, is what happened to all the stuff in that briefcase. Miss Garcia told everybody she looked in there wasn't anything there. I have no reason to believe that she would lie about that, and yet at 6 o'clock in the evening, the night he died, I saw stuff in there. I'd seen stuff in there before. I mean, I didn't rifle through it, but he would get things out to show to me. So it wasn't just cram-packed, but there was maybe a stack like this of documents, at least, within the folders in this thing.
At the time they pulled the first kid in, I knew that the police had not done an adequate investigation on the matter because I knew they hadn't even talked to me, who was the attorney of the dead man, who was the person that helped him move and knew the most about the details and circumstances surrounding his move. So I was very suspicious of whether a proper investigation had been done by the Beaumont Police Department. My suspicions were only increased when it became obvious over the next few days that they probably had the wrong shooter. Apparently the gun that they arrested him with was not the same as the gun that had been used to kill Bill. I guess it added to the concerns that some people had about a possible conspiracy and the concerns that some people had about local law enforcement covering up the case.
I received information from a very reliable source that there was a connection between white supremacists in Wyder and the black neighborhood in which Bill Simpson was murdered. Guys involved in Klan activity went to that neighborhood to obtain drugs and women.
The Klan has long had a connection with drugs. A lot of folks involved with the Klan have criminal records of other types in the past.
If the Klan was going to hit Bill Simpson, they wouldn't have hired African-American gang members to do it. The only things that the Klan and gang members would exchange would be bullets. They would not hire the other to do any kind of job.
They're already selling crack cocaine to their brothers. They know it's, you know, ruining their brothers' lives, and then acting like those people have some type of social conscience and wouldn't be subject to being hired by some screwball from some neo-Nazi group that wanted to kill somebody if they paid them enough.
I was told by other confidential informants that a member of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan talked about arranging the assassination of Bill Simpson by Klan members.
Just because they call themselves the Klan don't mean they can't go and talk to a black person and say, hey, I need this done, can you do it? Yes, I can do it for a certain thing.
That Washington woman, she's the one that claimed the other guy did it when she knew darn well who did it. And I believe she was involved in a setup deal with him. And that landlady, I haven't very much to say about her neither.
Lynne Marie Garcia is a Beaumont entrepreneur, landlord, and even holds a private investigator's license. She buys and restores property in the rough neighborhoods of Beaumont. Her activities have caught the attention of such national TV shows as A Current Affair and Save Our Streets. Because she's such an unusual character, she became an easy target for inclusion in many amateur conspiracy theories. Miss Garcia was very helpful in arranging and even conducting many key interviews for this program, but strangely declined to appear herself.
The investigators were basically investigating her or trying to obtain information who had mics on. Clearly admit that Miss Garcia did not know that they had the mics on, but I was able to hear the conversations in a truck van outside of her home. And I clearly heard her clearly state individuals had came to her back door and told her, specifically she mentioned on 2 occasions, that they clearly indicate to her that she better not say anything. But it does bring about the suspicion that she does know more than what she has led the public to believe as to Bill's death.
The lady that you referenced, I know very little about her except that she did see him on television. She offered to provide him a place to live, which would be federally subsidized. As far as her any part of a conspiracy, I have no doubt that she didn't have anything at all to do with Bill Simpson's death.
Tell me about Miss Garcia. How much has she meant to you? How much has she helped you?
She's helped me a lot. She's a godsend.
An FBI agent named Ron Kelly, who is the resident agent in charge of the Beaumont office, describing Bledsoe's theories. He said they had more leaps than a Nike commercial. And as it turned out, he was right. Most of the information we were already aware of, and the rest of the information I would not consider credible evidence or admissible. And it does not change any activities on the part of the FBI. The only thing that Bledsoe ended up being right about was that the shooter in the Basha case didn't kill Bill Simpson, but the police already knew that. Bledsoe and his people went out and basically got a bunch of unreliable statements from a bunch of unreliable witnesses.
Well, public opinion even today thinks that the Klan has something to do with it, even though the individuals that actually committed the crime have already been tried. There's people today that still think that somehow the Klan, I don't know, hired these 2 individuals to commit this crime or whatever. They still believe the Klan has some kind of tie-in to it. And when I first heard about it, I knew it would go that way. No matter who was caught for the crime, somehow, because it was so timely for him moving out of Wyder, the belief would always be there.
This is information that I received from confidential informants, some of which I was unable to verify for purposes of factual evidentiary support. One confidential informant told me that there was a meeting of Klan leaders, he was present, where they voted to assassinate Bill Simpson. They being members of both the White Chameleon Knights of the Ku Klux Klan and the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. I received that information from one of my confidential informants who said he was at the meeting. I was unable to verify that information.
Well, if there's any truth about this assassination meeting or whatever, the feds would have indicted everyone involved, and everyone would be doing time in federal pen now. I mean, this was all investigated exhaustively by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office down here. All these allegations and grand jury proceedings, and nothing came of it other than one person being indicted for putting a Klan card on a pastor's door. It's not like this hasn't been looked at exhaustively by the feds. I mean, they had deputy attorney generals down here from Washington, D.C. that were supervising the grand jury proceedings, and nothing was found. So as far as allegations that William Hill may make, I just would class them in the realm of fantasy.
I think a lot of these accusations came out of paid informants that wanted to keep getting paid. In other words, you sell your soul, you get your 30 pieces of silver. If you don't come up with some kind of information, the federal government sooner or later is going to say, well, look, we paid you this money, you came up with nothing, we're going to cut you off. So I think some of these paid informants probably figured they wanted to keep getting paid, so they came up with all this nonsense. And like you just said, it was all investigated, nothing to it.
Beaumont cops never stopped working this case, but it started to stretch out. We're talking about 9 months. Early May of '94. Keep in mind, Simpson was killed September 1st, 1993. Well, everything started to fall into place, and they recovered the weapon. And like these things work a lot of times, suspects started rolling over on each other.
In terms of the way the evidence played out, we had an individual that was a young man in the area that got in some trouble. And he told the police, he said, hey, I can give y'all the gun that killed Bill Simpson. He told them where the gun was. The police went out there, were looking for the gun, subsequently questioned Benjamin Brown, who finally showed them where the gun was. Ballistics test proved that that was the gun.
It sent more than 100 shell casings and about 40 weapons to federal labs for testing weapons from different crimes because they were trying to find the gun that killed Simpson.
September the 1st of 1993, as the evidence played out, Kamal Lede, Clinton Cheeks went to a party. They stayed at this party for a while and met David Jerome Brown and Benjamin Brown. Benjamin Brown and David Brown and some of their other friends had previously that summer bought a Tech-9 machine pistol. They had it with them that night. They got a ride from Kamal, who was driving a black Beretta. And as they were driving around, they ended up in the vicinity of Victoria and Royal. Lydia and Bill and her daughter were standing at that street corner. Kamal, Clinton, David, and Benjamin drove down the street, and they turned here. It was at about here that Jerome recognized Lydia. Kamal pulled over in this area right in here. Jerome got out of the car, followed by Benjamin, walked up and confronted Bill right where that wreath is. That's where they shot Bill, and Lydia ended up in the street right there. They then ran back to the car right here, and Kamal sped away.
They claimed 5 shots. When we went out to the scene, the law had circled the shots in his body, and there was 8 of them. And these little boys said to us, that ain't where the man laid. He laid over here on the curb. We were standing in the middle of the road where all the papers said his body laid. We were saying our last goodbyes to him.
Lydia was found in the middle of the street here. The trail was bigger because they painted a circle around all of Lydia's blood. Lydia was shot in the leg, and she was hitting an artery, and she was bleeding profusely, and there was a lot of blood in the street, and they outlined the blood pattern in the street. There was actually a photo that I introduced into evidence that showed Lydia in the street being lifted into an ambulance. She was found in the street.
They asked Bill Simpson, give me your money.
All right, you said they asked Bill Simpson that. Did they know who he was?
I guess they call his name.
Lydia's account of that night has been somewhat varied because it was a very traumatic experience for her. She was standing on a street corner, and the next thing that she knew, her leg had been blown off. The accounts that she gave immediately following the incident were varied. She was in the hospital, she was under a lot of medication, and she had to have her leg amputated. When she eventually testified at trial, the trial of Jerome, she stated that Jerome was the one that shot her and that she only saw one gun. That can account for her stories, or differing stories of the evening, because of the great pain she was in. She was under a lot of medication.
After Simpson died and Wyder was once again all white, the international media condemned Wyder, confusing the facts and blaming Wyder for what happened in Beaumont.
watch this area just to avoid all the blacks. Everything is there. Cannot use that word.
It was announced that there would be a Victory in Vidor parade celebrating Vidor's return to an all-white city. This became a case study in how the media could be factually accurate, but totally wrong.
It's a big joke. They're bringing this town a bad name from somewhere in Mississippi. Go back home.
Yes, there was a Victory in Vidor parade, but it wasn't held by Vidorians at all, but by Richard Barrett's nationalist movement from faraway, learned Mississippi. The local media covered the city's passionate and expensive legal battle to keep the nationalists out, but this aspect of the story was ignored by the networks.
Vidor, it has been the bad guy too long.
Somebody out of state supposed to be claiming a victory for what reason? And yet the only victory that needs to be claimed and all is whenever they get on a bus and get out of our town and we get a victory.
The ministers of this community are opposed to someone from outside our community coming in with basically a hate parade.
The Nationalists are not related to the Ku Klux Klan, but they are a white supremacist organization that claims an international influence, although critics charge its real membership does not extend much past Barrett himself. They are often referred to as neo-Nazis in the press, but Barrett says he doesn't like being compared to America's World War II enemy. The TV viewers of the world saw large crowds at the Nationalist rally in Vidor, but probably weren't aware that both the Nationalists and the protesters were from towns outside of Vidor. Most of the Vidor locals boycotted the parade altogether and attended not one but two Brotherhood prayer rallies across town. The passionate reaction of the people in Vidor against the Nationalists begs the question, if they were so pro-integration, why didn't they speak up earlier? In truth, some had. All along, some groups, especially the churches of Vidor, were doing everything they could to help welcome the minorities into Vidor. The national media came in looking for evidence of a racist town stuck in a time warp, and found only what they were looking for. Angry Klansmen make for much more provocative TV images than gentle-hearted clergy, leaving the people of Vidor bitter and suspicious of the media. The worst example of this was when the American version of A Current Affair planted a black actor in Vidor to record the racial harassment he would receive. When he didn't receive any, the TV crew tried in vain to deliberately provoke racist episodes, leaving the show to have to use stock footage of burning crosses and skinhead rallies from outside of Vidor to pad their story.
We've been talking all day about the desegregation of Wyder, and we're here in the Julie Rogers Theater in Beaumont, Texas.
Michael Lowe made an easily disproved joke on the Montel Williams show that if he released his membership list, Vidor would no longer have a police department. There are Klansmen living in Vidor, and Vidor has more than its fair share of racists, such as the Bat Lady, among others. But it's worth remembering that Vidor is also home to the church ministers who were trying to save drug addicts from a life on the street. It is also worth remembering that for all the hype, there wasn't one verifiable act of violence committed against the black people in Vidor. They left in terror not because of what happened to them, but because of what their white neighbors told them might happen.
Even the people that didn't support the Klan were telling about all the Klan activity that occurred in Vidor.
She threatened the black kids. She never struck the black kids.
I said, did they actually tell you that Vidor, Texas was KKK country?
There's probably a few rednecks still around, but I don't think it's that much Klan anymore, no. The Klan's not welcomed.
Out of, in my opinion, close in a town with roughly 11,000, I would say there's maybe was 100 Klan members, if that many, that was still left in Vidor.
Less than 50.
With the eyes of the world on Vidor, National Housing Secretary Henry Cisneros staged a very public takeover of the Orange County Housing Authority, forcing the resignation of the local directors who insisted they were only following orders. Some months later, at the break of dawn, a busload of black families entered the complex, locking the gates behind them. The town leaders declare the complex was officially desegregated, and there have been no major incidents. When the cameras went away, so did most of the Klan, and so did most of the problems.
Like they say, Vidor is known for prejudice, but the black folks and the white folks that moved out here, that wasn't out here when the racism stuff was going on, it's a real peaceful place. If you go somewhere and you tell another black person that you stay here in Vidor, they will look at you like you're crazy. You mean to tell me you stay in Vidor, but this is a peaceful place. No matter, nothing really goes on out here as racist or nothing like that.
You know, I don't know what's scarier, the random street violence that took Bill Simpson's life, or the insistence by certain people that he had to be killed in some kind of race-based crime. Why would they want to believe that?
There's no evidence whatsoever that I've seen, and I've seen everything on paper involving this case, and there was no evidence supporting that. The defense saw the same evidence I had, and they had no evidence supporting a conspiracy. This was all the evidence points to a random street crime.
And I will tell you that Bill Simpson changed the attitudes about some of the people, some of the residents in that complex about blacks. But you had this big, large black man move into the complex that all these people had grown up with being afraid of big, large black men, who was just the nicest person they'd ever met. Those people that had been racist and used the word nigger all their lives didn't hesitate to let Bill watch their kids, didn't hesitate to let their kids play with Bill. He was a good person, they could tell it.
Richard Stanfield died of a heart attack soon after the second wave of desegregation. David Jerome Brown was sentenced to life in prison for murdering Bill Simpson. He must serve 40 years before being eligible for parole. Brown's defense never suggested a Klan conspiracy. Investigations by the Beaumont Police, the Wyder Police, the FBI, the NAACP, and numerous journalists have failed to find any credible link between Bill Simpson's murder and his stay in Wyder. Tom Oxford and Richard Stewart say they now believe the police version of Bill Simpson's murder. Most of Simpson's friends and family do not. Bill Hale discounted most of the murder theories but said he had confidential testimony that points to a Klan conspiracy. Hale died of lung cancer in 2006. Bill Simpson's mother buried him in California. Ross and Joyce Dennis moved to several different places before settling into a small Texas town they felt was free of Klan activity. Jasper. Edith Marie Johnson was ordered to pay large financial settlements to Bill Simpson's mother and Ross Dennis's family for harassment, which she will probably never be able to pay. Bill Simpson's name was placed on the new community center in the Wyder projects, and then the building was left to fall into decay.